communities that have not been covered with supply from the national grid infrastructure. This implies using approaches for most of the areas with renewable options of electricity generation. The Minister of Power Works and Housing says the qualifications of the new appointees may mean nothing until they justify the presidential goal of giving people electricity in rural areas.
So just understand that, yes, government has a policy of rural electrification, access to electricity for as many people as is possible. Your responsibility now is to go and achieve that. So we will continue to provide policy, we will continue to provide guidance, we will continue to help you get your budgets through Parliament. We will break down barriers for you, but really and truly it is you who will do the work.
He says the first approach for the new appointees is to develop a team spirit for the tasks ahead. The minister reminds the organization to have a clear understanding of its roles and responsibilities. Babatunde Fashola expresses gratitude of President Buhari to the immediate past acting managing director and his team for milestones and advises the inaugurated board on this important issue.
What I will advise you is don't dissipate too much energy on trying to find who did what. Collect the data. The time to ask people to account for what they have done never expires. So create a unit or a department where you see them, but focus your energy on getting that project to work so that people can have electricity.
The minister again tasked REA on the utilization of small hydro dams in rural communities to generate electricity and implementation of power plants for selected Nigerian universities. REA board chairman Umar Mazamaza expresses readiness of the new team to justify the trust of President Buhari in appointing them to serve the nation. The new managing director, Damilola Ogumbiyi, on the way forward.
I just wanted to comment on what the minister said and the president. We're fully committed to achieve the mandate to make sure we get power to the most vulnerable people in our society, people that have no access to electricity right now. But while saying that, I must also emphasize that a lot of work has already been done by the Rural Electrification Agency. My predecessor did about 104 projects last year, and what has happened is that there's been a lack of communication. So we also want to communicate the message as well as go and do all the remaining projects that we have to do in a good formative way, and also focus on renewable energy, off-grid solutions as a way forward to getting as much access to millions of Nigerians as possible.
She also elaborates on partnership with expectations by REA from development agencies.
One of my colleagues, the ED for Rural Electrification Fund, his key focus is to try and create a lot of partnership with development agencies and funds and grants around the world to show that we are very serious about renewable energy, and it's the quickest way of getting power to our development agencies. Currently, we're talking to the World Bank and we're talking to DFID as well. We did a few projects with them before, and we want to really secure the relationship and make sure that people see us as a hub to come and give funding for renewable energy off-grid projects.
The new management team of REA comprises mainly of vibrant youth in tandem with Buhari administration of engaging and utilizing their capacities in nation building, as expectations are also high that the new board membership with long-standing record of service and experience will provide the direction.
And when you have, there are certain indices that if they move, for example, inflation, foreign exchange, gas price, production availability, and so on and so forth. If any of these indices move 5% over or below, the benchmark, there's going to be an automatic adjustment of tariff. Now, we were promised when we came in as investors that we are going to have a cost-reflective tariff. What that means is that at least we will have a tariff that covers our cost and also ensures that we make a return on our investment. That has not happened since we came.
So we are faced with this conundrum, and the only way to resolve it is to continue going forward, not to say, let us cancel the privatization. And I have had the privilege as chairman of the Power Committee to have a look at what happened in other parts of the world when they did their own. And in fact, there's a book that I'm reading at the moment of the power reforms that were done in 5 different countries and 3 different continents. And the result of it all is that the same problems we are confronting here is the same problem they had to confront everywhere else. When you start, because it is something that concerns everybody and affects the life of everybody, you can't ramp up power without the associated costs. And that cost has to be passed on somehow. And of course, you can pass on that cost to tariff. But if you ramp up the cost with the tariff in such a brutal manner, then you will find that the ordinary person cannot afford power anymore.
For goodness sake, government should act decisively, act promptly, and make sure that the support that it is giving to the privatized companies in Nigeria's power sector is appreciated. The government has been magnanimous. The government has decided, in view of all the controversies surrounding the performances of these companies, to support them. Now, the government is intending to provide a funding of over 700 billion naira to support these companies, to pay all outstanding liabilities. If you pay all these outstanding liabilities, what do you expect in return? Are you going to have a commensurate level of improvement in Nigeria's power sector? By the time you pay out outstanding liabilities, if the attitude of the new owners remains the same, I can tell you without fear of favor, without fear of contradiction, that we're only going back to square one. These monies will be collected, and then the same story would continue to prevail.
The government clearly understands how a debt-ridden sector can slow down economic growth and well-being of the people. Hence, a pragmatic approach to consolidate on approaches of addressing the challenges with a robust power sector recovery plan. The plan, which was unveiled since February this year, primarily aims at creating a viable sector that is privately run. The policy is to impact directly on transparency and service delivery in the whole value chain. Highlighting the urgency of the policy to change the fortunes of the sector, Minister of Power Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola, at the meeting of operators says the federal government is committed.
Approved by the Federal Executive Council, which cuts across the issues of gas, transmission, metering, loss reduction, contract enforcement, customer service, and consumer protection, to mention a few. What this means, again, is that government is determined to enforce the rules in the sector, including on its own self. Government is not above the law. The daily losses in the power sector are avoidable, and they must be avoided. Every loss must be accounted for or paid for, whether it be by cash, or by sanctions, or by a combination of both and more. This is a business, and I have had cause to say that in any business that is properly run, when losses begin to occur, those who run those businesses either pay for them either by losing their jobs or making refunds or by resigning. We are heading in that direction. Whether it will be in government, whether it will be in the private sector. We will track every loss and we will apportion it at every door. And we will expect that those losses will be accounted for. So this is the time for everybody to sit up, to brace up, and be ready to assume his own role or ship out of this sector.
The minister stresses other areas of mandate and expectations.
You will see in the last few weeks, especially since February, that government is now stepping up valiantly to its responsibilities and confronting the challenges in the sector. Some of the things that have happened since February, if we should, and I will recap, is that the Regulatory Commission has been reconstituted. And they have briefed us now what they are doing. In terms of policy, government has taken action to approve a payment assurance guarantee that addresses the liquidity challenges in the sector. And let me reiterate, because I have heard some association of DISCO saying that 701 billion is not enough, we didn't provide for them. We didn't contract with an association. We contracted with 11 individual companies. You have a right to associate. It is a constitutional guarantee, but we don't have contract with an association. And the regulator knows what to do within the exercise of your rights, because I will leave them to take their decisions. But what we seek to achieve is not to give money to anybody, but to guarantee to those who do their work diligently, honestly, and perform their contracts that their entitlements and receivables will be secured and paid. But there are obligations across the value chain for others to also perform their role. Lately also, some of the things that government has done is that not only is it verifying DISCO debts, which we have done consistently in this meeting, some of you have still failed to give us all of the information that we need, and I have reiterated that we will not pay any debt that we cannot verify. And as proof that we remain committed to paying debts that we verify, we have paid the debts owed by the Federal Secretariat in Abuja to Abuja DISCO, and we paid about 374,551,000.
On the side of the Regulatory Commission, the imperative towards entrenching monitoring and enforcement of regulations is to be given serious attention.
This is something that we have realized that is a major issue. If you issue orders and regulations, nobody really goes out to measure whether this has actually been abided by the players. So this is going to be a major change within the Commission itself, compliance, monitoring, and enforcement. Now, within the short period that we were within in the Commission, we have realized a few shortcomings, with the licensees. One major issue is issue of corporate governance within the licensees. And what has happened is that the core investors, shortly after taking over, some of them, quite a number actually, running the businesses like a family business. Running a utility is not running a family business. So we are going to actually brush up the regulation for fit and proper, which is already circulated, and make sure that people do not bring in their cousins and sisters and brothers to run the business. So we want to make sure that the right people are in the right positions as far as management of these utilities are concerned.
The Vice Chairman of NEC says revenue flow will be properly managed as he speaks on establishing transparency in the market.
It's generally agreed within the industry that the money within the market belongs to all players. It doesn't belong to DISCOs. And therefore, we want to inch closer to managing revenues of the industry. In other words, taking away the power of appropriation of the market revenues from the DISCO to a centralized system where there is equity in the way this money is shared. Because that's the only way you can incentivize this cost to go and collect more money. You can't just sit back, you generate power, and you just sit back and you just get whatever comes to you. Then the next issue we are working on is procurement by licensees. The Commission has had something called open book review, during which we discovered that a lot of the licensees are actually not abiding by this concept of prudent expenditure going to tariff. Prices that have been paid for goods and services are completely out of this world. And we have also noted a lot of insider transactions, related party transactions. And therefore, the Commission is going to start working on regulation of procurement within the power sector to make sure that there is competitiveness when these utilities are actually buying for goods and services. It doesn't mean that when you're going to buy an insulator, you have to follow certain guidelines, but for major procurements, at least there should be some guidelines. A lot has also been said about MDA debts. The government is working very hard to settle that. But going forward, the Commission is getting set to issue orders to all discos to make sure that all MDAs are connected to prepaid meters. And we have extracted the commitment of the minister that he will get all the necessary political support to make sure it happens. And for its implementation, our thinking is we're going to get somebody very high up in the security agency, maybe Minister of Defense or Chief of Defense Staff, to commission the first wave of prepaid meters that will be connected to army barracks and police and so on, to make sure that this is the way to go forward.
Sector participants insist on the need for players to work closely towards removing skepticism and mistrust among Nigerians on the workings of the power sector.
And therefore, you have to strike a balance in between putting an appropriate tariff and doing what people can pay and not putting too much hardship on the people. And so different countries have had to take different measures depending on the political configuration of the place and on what they agree as a social contract to say this is how we resolve this problem of costs. It's the same thing in Nigeria. We have the cost of power today coming from the generation companies at somewhere above 60 naira. And of course, the sales of power, somewhere around half of that price, about 28 to 32 naira, depending on the distribution company. And so, from inception, there's a gap. Now, how do you deal with that gap? That's really the issue in different countries. In some countries, they calculate that gap and they bring a subsidy and use it to resolve that. We're still in the process of the negotiation of how to deal with this gap. Presently, what they just do is to pass the gap to the distribution companies and insist that the distribution companies are not doing the right thing, or they are not paying as much as they should pay, they are not doing. But of course, once there's a gap, that means they can't pay as much as they should pay. And of course, the distribution companies too, having seen that government in some way is also lax in regulating them, have also exploited the loopholes that are there to make, I would say, decisions that are not economic and decisions that are purely good for themselves to the detriment of the public. And so from every which way, I think that what we are set to do now, which is the next step of the intervention of the National Assembly, is to be able to bring everybody together and find an appropriate way of resolving these problems.
Look at what happens in Jos. All right, NESCO provides its customers quality, reliable power supply. And if there will be a power outage, they will announce to their customers that from so and so period, we are going to be on routine maintenance outage. And then therefore there will be no supply. And exactly on the time that they have taken, you would see that power would be restored to its customers. So I think the government has tried. The government's effort must be appreciated. And then the new owners, the new investors, should not take the government for granted. It is time for them to be shown what they ought to do. The performance agreements that they have signed is a document that is reviewable, is interpretable, and is enforceable. What has come out of that performance agreement?
Minister of Power has provided a document to us for us to look at and see where they want to go. And we're going to now have that dialogue with the minister, with the leadership of the National Assembly, both the House and the Senate, and we will agree with them and come to what will be most beneficial to everybody. On the one hand, you wouldn't want privatization to be cancelled, so we wouldn't want discos to now be killed. On the other hand, you wouldn't also want the people who are generating and the gas suppliers and all that not to be paid. And on the other hand, of course, you wouldn't want the final consumer to have a tariff that is so high that it does not make sense and will only encourage people to do power theft and all the associated things.